Today we're here to go over some key elements around forging a relationship between information security and digital workplace. To go into our introductions, a little bit of why we're here and how did we get here. Basically, what we've done as eShare, we are steeped in the world of digital collaboration and digital workplace and collaborating with files and so forth, and we see a lot of friction between digital workplace and security. So we believe that forging those relationships and moving forward is a critical way of getting your organization to the next level with regard to your digital workplace. So from this session, you can expect some strategies on how to work together. We'll go a little bit into the problem set in the beginning, talk about what the challenges are, and then talk about how can you go forward as an organization and make it easy for your folks to do the right thing in your organization. So I'd really like to take the time to introduce our presenters here. We've got Mike Towers, who's the Chief Security and Trust Officer from Visa. He has been a CISO in many different organizations, household names, really a thought leader. And Courtney Lolino from Bain, who is a digital workplace executive that's been in the industry for a long time and has a lot of experience in dealing with these kinds of challenges in the real world. So I'm not going to sit up here and talk a lot. I want our presenters to really have the time to have the conversation and open things up. And so I'm going to ask them a few questions and then let them go into some detail on those questions. And then towards the end of the presentation, we'll talk about some recommendations about how to move forward. So starting off, we'll start with Courtney. Courtney, in your experience, so what are those friction points, those real stopping points that slow your organization down and cause problems?
Awesome. First and foremost, I just want to say thank you all. Thank you, Mike, for the introduction. Great to be here with you all. Before I dive into some of the points of friction, I wanted to start with, what are my priorities as a digital workplace leader? And that really looks like, I am working to drive a powerful, a simple, a collaborative digital workplace experience. Ideally one that strategically enables the business and drives competitive advantage. So with that in mind, if I think about some of the points of friction that I face on a day-to-day basis or my team, it really sort of circles around 4 areas. And unfortunately, security is involved in some, if not all of those. So the first roadblock is around, just a roadblock in general to innovation. So as I think about driving innovative technology experiences, I need to implement cutting-edge tools. Unfortunately, a lot of times that process is very lengthy, right? I have to go through, myself or my team has to go through some lengthy security processes, multiple stage gates, sometimes takes months to actually get anywhere. And that slows me down. A lot of times, all I want to do is simply do a proof of concept to understand, is there any value here? And even that is met with, well, you've got to go through XYZ process, and I determine a month later, in 30 minutes, that it's not valuable. So that's really the first area of friction. Second area of friction, I would say, would be just misaligned goals in general. So I'll present you with 2 scenarios, and hopefully one, if not both, you can relate to. So scenario 1, I'm a product owner in a digital workplace, and I've got a big initiative I'm running. I determined, I pilot it, all good, ready to implement, and all of a sudden I realize, I need security buy-in, I need to make sure it's properly configured. I go to the security team, well, no one can help me for 2 months, so my timeline is completely dead in the water. Other scenario is, I'm a digital workplace leader, I've got a roadmap for the year, and all of a sudden I get a call from my CISO saying, hey, we've got to get approval and meet security requirements for a specific certification that the business needs. We need your teams, you've got to drop everything, it's got to be done in 2 months. I'm not speaking at all from experience on this one. So those are 2 scenarios where, had we aligned ahead of time, we probably wouldn't be in that situation. Third point is really around the challenge of decision making. So if deciding whether or not to implement a technology can be tricky, especially if you're in a more consensus-driven organization. And I'm feeling this right now. So we're looking to implement AI capabilities in our conferencing platform, and I am currently in this doom loop between security, legal, and risk. of, are we comfortable? Is this okay? How do we de-risk it? So 3 months later, I could have launched it already, but we're still in discussions and unclear on who actually has the decision-making power. And then fourth, and definitely, I'm sure we've all experienced this in some way, would be just an overall degraded user experience. So typically, tools that are sort of enterprise sanctioned and secure, a lot of times can mean they're cumbersome or they're archaic. An example here, and this is from a number of years ago, but before my organization was really comfortable with implementing third-party SaaS tools, our answer for project management was Microsoft Project. And apologies if any of you are really gung-ho about Microsoft Project, but no one used it, and we had a rampant case of shadow IT using tools like Trello, Jira, Asana, in which case we were way less secure than we would have been had we just implemented one of those tools. So those are some of the points of friction. At this point, I've sort of poked at security long enough, so over to Mike, turnabout is fair play.
So one more quick thing, Mike, before we start. I love talking to folks about these things because they always have these great terms. We should have called this session "Escaping the Doom Loop."
Yeah.
Right? That was great. So, Mike, we'd love to hear your perspective on this. Thanks.
Yeah, don't worry, walk away. We're used to it. So I think that this is an interesting question. I think if you look at the slides and the bullets, I think I can summarize it in 3 themes. Number 1 is the priorities are different. For those of us who've been doing this for a long time, I don't want to say how long I've been doing it, but I remember when most security organizations worked for infrastructure, and then maybe they worked for the CIO. And now you see a lot of security teams working maybe even as a peer of the CIO. And the fundamental reason for that is the top priority and the fundamental mindset and motivation is different. Technology organizations are motivated by 4 things: cost, quality, speed, and adoption. Security teams are motivated by 4 very different things: risk reduction, compliance assurance, demonstrable control and control effectiveness, trust and resilience. So that's why I remember from personal experience, I was at a board meeting at GSK, and it was the first time I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to be excited to go present to the board. I'm at the board and my role has changed at the board meeting. And I thought boards were supposed to be oversight, not management. But the fundamental concern was because I worked for the CIO, the board was worried that I would sacrifice control for service levels. Because that's how IT is motivated. So first of all, we have to recognize that the motivations are different. It doesn't mean one's right or one's wrong, it's just a little bit different. Of course, there has to be some sort of collaboration. Secondly, I think another theme here is that the security teams traditionally try to augment gaps in technology with things like training and awareness. I'm a big believer that the mindset for training and awareness has to shift to marketing. Marketing is the best way to get behavior to stick, which is what security leaders need, is they need behaviors to stick. So all of that trend of marketing, just-in-time reminders, etc., well, it's becoming too hard to keep up with all the scenarios to train and market in because there's too much variability, there's too much change, there's too many new platforms, too many new devices. And frankly, as security leaders and technology leaders, we owe it to the users to not just rely on training and awareness. We need to have a responsibility to build some of the stuff into the platform. But that's tough to keep up with. And I think the third thing, frankly, from a friction perspective, I'll admit I ruffled a few feathers at RSA a couple years ago when I said this. One of the biggest problems in security mindset is the arrogance. Let's face it, there's only one part of technology, generally speaking, that goes to the board 4 times a year. There's only one part of technology that's in the Wall Street Journal 3 times a week on a breach. All of that feeds into, I'm the most important guy in the room, or woman in the room. And that's got to change. So there has to be a shift from that defensive mindset and frankly that arrogance to be much more collaborative and much more values driven. We'll talk a little bit about this as a recommendation, but a little bit of a preview of coming attractions. Security leaders have to stop motivation by fear and start motivation by value. And this is one of these discussions with digital workplaces, how we make that shift.
Thanks, Mike. So when we talk about one of those value points, right, it's about collaboration. How do the teams work together to create business value? And so we'll start with Mike this time. Mike, can you give us some thoughts about how, from your perspective, collaboration has evolved and changed over the last few years?
Yeah, well, there was this big thing called COVID, which obviously changed everything. But even before COVID, I mean, I worked for global organizations, and it was funny and a little bit interesting. Well, nothing about COVID was funny, but it was interesting hearing about all the challenges of remote working. I mean, I'm used to having people in 7 countries, so remote was always a challenge for me. But when you talk about remote being distributed versus remote being working from home or working by yourself, if anybody's interested in this, I'm a criminal psychologist, a closet Mr. Detective or whatever, but I follow a lot. John Hopkins is doing tremendous work in their psychology department about this. People are more likely to be careless when they're by themselves than they are when they're surrounded by people. So as soon as you start having people work from home, the chances of careless, higher risk behavior with data goes up. That's just a fact, psychologically. So recognizing that and trying to figure out a way to navigate around that is one element here. And that's not just, again, from a distributed perspective and a remote perspective, but also recognizing that, I remember the days where there used to be a decision whether or not a third party was involved in a business process. That's no longer a decision. I defy anybody to point out to me a business process in their organization that does not involve somebody who doesn't wear your badge. Third parties are involved in everything. So that is a recognition and an evolution we all have to be mindful of. Second thing is, I alluded to this a little before, but there's a tremendous amount of new tools being created and tools being, and you'll walk the floor and you'll hear, well, Microsoft doesn't do this, Google doesn't do that, so we're going to plug in here, we're going to plug in there. All of those need new monitoring, new security capabilities, understanding how they all work. So there's definitely new tools, new startups coming at this all the time, and that can be exciting and invigorating, but it can also be distracting. I think the third area that you see on the slide here that I'll talk to is that there's all sorts of different ways to move data around. I'm not happy with the way that I've configured my SharePoint or Teams, so I'm going to throw this attachment in WhatsApp. Or I'm going to throw this attachment. Every chat program from Zoom to WebEx, they all have file transfer capabilities or some sort of collaboration. So all of that is tough to keep track of and recognize. And then last, but certainly not least, is that anybody who watches the news and knows what's going on in the cyber and the digital security world recognizes that the hackers are understanding that most big companies do this pretty well. Don't want to jinx us and say we all do, but most big companies do this pretty well. So how am I going to go after these big companies? I'm going to go after the third parties they all use that aren't doing it so well. Maybe they're smaller, maybe they're more point focused. So, and we're all collaborating with third parties. Separately at the bar over a beer, over a drink, I can tell you about 7 or 8 third parties that the entire pharmaceutical industry is based on that maybe have 50 employees or less. So it's collaborating with them from a security perspective and recognizing the importance of that is a big evolution. And Change Healthcare is all over the news. That's perfect recognition of that. The Aetnas, the US Healthcares, the Cignas, they're pretty good at security. But the ones that they all depend on, maybe not so. So that's a big change here, and our ability to collaborate with them is becoming much more important.
Yeah, tremendous points, Mike. Thank you for that. External collaboration, sharing data externally is table stakes now. It is part of the game. So Courtney, I'd love to hear your angle on this.
Yeah, sure. So Mike obviously gave a synopsis of the sort of evolution of the security landscape. I'll give you the other side of the coin, which is how has sort of ways of working changed. So the first, and again, Mike hit on this, we've heard this phrase 1,000,001 times, it doesn't make it any less relevant. The rise in distributed work fundamentally changed how we get things done, right? We don't need to be physically present to collaborate effectively. I can do that with anyone in the world. And the ripple effects of that are massive, right? So the first ripple effect that we'll talk through is just the proliferation of digital tools. Mike obviously talked about that from a security lens. From a user experience perspective, it's slightly overwhelming, but I know that my users can go out into the market and find any tool they want to meet their exact use case. And many times it's much easier for them to go sign up, take 3 minutes, sign up for a free account with something that's going to exactly meet their need, as opposed to figuring out what enterprise tools are available, how do I get access to them, how do they work, etc. So that's sort of the second area of evolution. Third area of evolution is really around the rise of real-time collaboration. So, gone are the days of people, only sending around email attachments and dealing with version control issues, etc. Right? Companies like Microsoft with 365, Google Workspace, the sort of evolution of those are people just expect that they're going to be able to jump into a document, edit it, collaborate in real time, and get to the final deliverable way faster than they did before. So that's table stakes. The fourth, and certainly not the least area, I would say, is just the growth of external partnerships. So historically speaking, external collaboration was an afterthought, or is an afterthought for a lot of companies, right? If you're working internally within the company, maybe you've got some dynamic capabilities there, but as soon as you need to do something with someone outside of the firm, best of luck. Go send an email, that's what you got. And that really isn't going to suffice anymore, right? The walls of the office are fairly arbitrary. We need to be able to work with clients, with customers, with vendors, with partners, and we expect that we can do that in the same way that I can do that with my colleague today. So all of these are sort of evolutions within the digital workplace experience that really affect how we think about, what does collaboration and safe collaboration look like going forward.
Thanks, Courtney. So you can see that just from the very base levels and the foundational elements of each of these organizational units, that things naturally create these friction, right? And it's pretty terrifying to think about this challenge in that way. But I know you two put your heads together on some ways of going forward. So I'm again going to bring up a slide here that talks about some of the base level things that you can do as an organization to improve the relationship between your digital workplace and your security environments and your organizations. So please proceed.
Yeah, so Mike and I have sort of put our heads together to say, so what? So what do we do about this, right? We've got all these points of frictions. We have an ever-evolving landscape. How do we bring these two organizations together to drive value for the business? So our first recommendation would be around, joint planning sessions. It is absolutely critical that digital workplace leadership and CISOs get together early and often to make sure they're aligned. So what does this actually look like? I would say first and foremost, coming up with joint business cases. So as you're developing roadmaps, as you're thinking about what is next, talk to each other. When I do my planning for the year, I talk to my team, we put together what we think the roadmap's gonna look like, and the first person I talk to is the CISO. Just say, look, here's what we're thinking. Is this aligned with where you're going? How can we help you? What resources do you need, or what resources do I need, and when? How do we get that out in the open early? So I would say, collaborating on business cases, annual planning, quarterly roadmap reviews, getting time with your security counterparts to say, hey, here's what we did in the last month, but here's what's coming. Are we ready? Where do we need to slide into each other's efforts? And then thirdly, I would say, I encourage my team to essentially map stakeholders between digital workplace and security. So whether you're a product owner working with a security architect, or the digital workplace lead working with your CISO, understand who is that stakeholder, meet regularly, invest in the relationship. It will pay off quite a bit. So, Mike, anything on your end there?
Yeah, I would say that a couple points come to mind here when I think about a way forward. Number one is I would say it's a two-way street when it comes to the collaboration and working together, to Courtney's point. So when you're thinking about a business objective or enabling the business from collaboration or any new technology platform, it's important to recognize that everything that we know and touch has a potentially security implication, and no security team is resourced to cover all scenarios, so that partnership and recognition is really, really important to work together. I can't get past the automobile analogy. So I think about, and I'm not a Formula One fan, I've read about it, I've heard about it, but I have read about, I think it was in the 70s or the 80s when Ferrari was taking advances versus Lamborghini and Mercedes in the European car. And the part of the reason was they didn't have better engines, they had better brakes. So they enabled the cars to go faster because the brakes were better. And that's the way the security and the relationship with the rest of the technology function needs to evolve, is that we're not here to break and slow you down, we're here to enable you to go faster. It's a different mindset. And again, another automobile analogy is if you go to Detroit and see the assembly lines, the brakes and the airbags and the seatbelts used to be the last thing on the assembly line. Now security is involved in every checkpoint on the assembly line. It's built into dashboard apps, it's built into the way that the structure is built. So all of that from the beginning is important. And the flip side is true. If I'm going to build a security tool, I better damn well consider the user experience impact, because if people don't use it, it doesn't help them. If people spend most of their time learning a way to get around your security controls, they're not going to be worth what you've invested in them and what you think they're going to provide you. So one of the things that I heard once and challenged to me from the CEO, which has always stuck with me, is Mike and your team make it easy to do the secure thing. It's not always easy. Opportunistically, if we're going to go to a ball game or a football game where we know President Biden's going to be there, we know it's going to be a pain to get in the stadium, because we expect additional friction at that point. But for the most part, we want the friction to be something that is kind of like ingrained but expected, but we're not going to invest any energy going around it. So I think that's another really important point. And last thing I would say is to work hard to try to unify. And I know this is supposed to be vendor agnostic, but this is something eShare is very good at. They unify security structures across multiple platforms. There's so much variability in this space that a common platform to unify some of the challenges, all the variability I mentioned before about all the different tools that are popping up, they all handle permissions differently. There's no SAML for permissions. Google calls permissions differently, Microsoft calls them differently, AWS calls them differently, Salesforce, Snowflake, Databricks, Informatica, every platform that has your data in it handles permissions differently. So the ability to unify that, we owe it to the business to allow them to navigate that, because the business will become much more of a stakeholder in managing their data. They should, because data is the new oil. It's how business is going to be run. So anything that you can do to unify that from a security perspective will help as well.
Thank you so much. From a vendor perspective, it's pretty interesting. Obviously, we sell and meet with customers and prospects all the time. And anecdotally, the customers that are the most successful are the ones that bring the most people to the meetings in the beginning, right? They bring all of these different disciplines to the meeting, whether it's identity and access management, digital workplace, enterprise architecture, information security, governance, legal, so forth and so on. They get all those stakeholders in the room very, very early in the process, and you can just smell the difference in success that those organizations have because they're collaborating early in the process. It's amazing, and thank you both for your thoughts on this. It was a tremendous insight. Folks, I want to give a little pitch for Gartner here. One of the analysts that we find tremendous value in, his name is Max Goss. He's here. If you get a chance to meet with him, it's tremendous, and he's got some really great sessions going on. I think he might be tomorrow's keynote speaker as well. Tremendous at understanding some of the challenges, especially if you're a Microsoft shop, some of the things that you might be dealing with from a problem statement perspective, and some interesting techniques on how to go forward. So with this, I'm going to ask you, the next steps here is if you'll join us at our booth and continue the conversation with Mike and Courtney. They'll be at our booth for about the next hour or so, and happy to talk further about the challenges that you might be having in your organization and some of the unique problems that you might be having. So we invite you to come join us in the conversation and go from there. But now I'll open up the floor. Are there any questions? Anybody's got any questions for Mike or Courtney? Going once?
How exactly is eShare helping you?
I'm sorry?
How exactly is eShare helping you in any of these scenarios?
Well, so eShare is a platform that started with the challenge of how do we share data externally with partners, vendors, supply chain, contractors, and so forth, and allow that if you can imagine inside your organization from a COVID perspective, you probably employed some sort of a cloud architecture, a Microsoft 365 or a Google Suite or something like that as your base for collaborating internally. Well, that's great. Everything's green and link-based and co-authoring and co-editing. Everything works perfectly inside, right? And then as soon as you go outside, it's everything that the past had to offer from the standpoint of sending files. Everything's about picking things up and moving them externally, creating yet another copy, which has versioning control, link blocking, a poor user experience, and a different user experience for each department in your organization, how they want to move data externally, right? And also using your email box as a collaborative experience, which it's not very good at, right? It's good at moving files from one place to another. So we take that collaborative experience that you have internally and extend it externally while adding those risk-appropriate controls, right? So what wound up happening was, is folks deployed, let's say, Microsoft 365 in their environment, typically triggered by COVID or something like that, right? And then what happened was they all went, oh, this is great. We can share everything externally. Oh, we can share everything externally, right? So then they closed their tenants. right? As soon as they closed their tenants off, now they created a problem set where there was a difference between how to collaborate internally and how to collaborate externally. And what we do is bridge that gap and make it seamless so that you can truly interact with your third parties in a way that is, from productivity and user experience, unparalleled. And then on top of that, now we're expanding into the internal governance space as well, because we're discovering that those same challenges that happened externally are happening internally as well.
From a customer perspective, I would add a couple of things. So back to my theme of make it easy to just do the secure thing. My last company was a pretty big company, highly collaborative. It was in pharmaceuticals, so constantly collaborating with research partners, biotechs, et cetera. And the culture was, if we had to do collaboration securely with a highly sensitive project, the native tools that we owned weren't enough. We had to move the data. So we talked a little bit about that, and people were getting frustrated because they would have to pick, we were a big O365 shop. Everybody was used to operating in there, but then they had to move into something else to collaborate externally, or if it met some sort of security standard. They hated that because they had to manage data around. Nothing against Microsoft or Google, they're tremendous platforms, but they're both designed for the masses, the 80%, even the 90%. The 10% of the high security use cases, they're not flexible enough to support that. So eShare does plug some good holes there for too, but again, keeps the experience for your users the same from an internal perspective. So those are the areas that we had a lot of folks that were trying to go around our controls because they didn't want to move their content to another platform. So what they do, they just slap it into an email. Or they put it on heck, some of them would even take screenshots with their phone. So there was everything they could do to get around the fact that once the native platform that we built on top of it helped us make secure collaboration much less onerous to our users.
I think from a digital workplace perspective too, one of the great things about eShare is it happens in the flow of work. So you don't need to introduce a new tool, a new platform, a new capability. You want to send an email attachment, that can automatically become a link. I don't have to think about anything. I attach it, it becomes a link. It has the appropriate levels of security. Me as an end user, I can just keep doing what I'm used to doing. So it is hard to find products that think so carefully about making security just sort of common sense and happening in the flow of work.
That's a great point. Thank you both. You can imagine how lucky we are. Both Mike and Courtney are members of our new advisory committee and board that are from all walks of life in all different industries, and the thought leadership that we get to take advantage of is tremendous. And it helps us forge our way forward in finding new ways of making things easier for folks. So we had a dinner last night, and one of the new customers that came on board was the head of their SharePoint deployment, and they were like, wait, I can collaborate externally by right-clicking on a file and saying share externally, and we're like, yeah, and they're like, I want in, right? Because it's that separate nature of the other tools and how to collaborate. It makes it adds that friction, and it adds that questionable nature to it. Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing something that's sanctioned by security, or am I even inadvertently creating shadow IT, if you will? So that native experience where you're never leaving the tools that you're used to using is a critical part of that. But while still creating that governance and that control and that security to keep your crown jewels and the data that's the new oil, right? You have to protect that in order to be able to succeed as a company. So, all right.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry, the comparison between eShare and O365, is that?
Power Pages, Global Pages, and the developers, those used to execute operation.
Power Pages, got it. So we've gotten answered asked that question quite a bit from folks trying to build Power Pages, and one of the key things, right, is that the development cycle and the amount of different kinds of controls that you can add to that and the flexibility that you can add to that it's really unparalleled. So one of the most recent customers we just spoke to, they tried to develop a Power Pages. They had a very poor user experience because what they assumed the user experience should be versus what actually manifested itself were different. And the second thing was that they actually created an area where there was oversharing. Okay, so the governance and control that you have on the back end of the Power Pages and what data is made available is not as easy to control as you would imagine. So one of the things, for example, that we have is we have an integration with Microsoft Purview from a data and container labeling perspective, as well as Microsoft DLP, where you can have your sensitive information types that identify which information is made available and what are like I talked about, those risk appropriate controls. It's automatic, policy-based controls as opposed to requiring a human to make the right decision at the right time. So the Power Pages, it's a tremendous amount of operational overhead for your organization to build those applications one by one. And the second one is understanding that interface with the security and governance part of the mix that becomes very challenging. I think we're over time.
1:30 at our booth, if they want to
Okay,
continue.
and please come visit us. We're happy to have that conversation in further detail. Thank you all. Appreciate it.